for the first time, I'm an attorney, the managing attorney at Shakhan and Wilkerson Law Firm. We are a two-attorney law firm. Myself and attorney Chelsea Wilkerson. We're a boutique law firm. We're small on purpose so that we can know our clients, get to know their cases, and we find that that is best to advance their legal interest. That all being said, today's topic is a good one. In the spirit of back to school, we wanted to talk to you a little bit about providing some tips to keep your kids out of trouble. That is always our goal. One of our videos in our library, if you had an opportunity to parse through the library, is about the school to prison pipeline. And so we want to make sure that your children do not get caught up in that school to prison pipeline from the school system into the justice system. And of course, as time goes on, it becomes much easier to do. And so we want to make sure that your child is not ensnared. And so the best way to do that is on some advice my mother gave me as a young person. She told me that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And that is the case when it comes to keeping our young people safe, focused, so that they can matriculate out of high school and into careers or into the military or into the police force, into entrepreneurship, whatever their little hearts desire. That is our desire. That is the richest and greatest resource that we have as a people, all our young people. Okay. And so that being said, let's dive into this important conversation. As always, a quick disclaimer, though we're not really covering legal content per se today, this is for educational purposes only. By watching this video, this does not establish an attorney-client relationship between yourself and the law firm of Shakhan and Wilkerson, or yourself and me as your counsel. As always, you can always take this information with a grain of salt, but the purpose of it is to provide, again, tips that are going to assist you as a parent in helping keep your kids safe and on the pathway to success, especially during the school year, okay? When you have less time with them and they're spending a lot more time with their peers and other adults, okay? That being said, we understand that the 2026-2027 school year is underway, and we want to make sure that those school suspensions, out of school suspensions, and school suspensions are minimized. I don't see much of it as we used to see when I was a young person. Those detentions are minimized. When I was a young person, I'm dating myself, we had Saturday school. And so you might not have been suspended out of school. You may not have gotten in school suspension. You'd have to come in on your day off, right? And you'd have to sit in school and on Saturday school if you were a cut up. And I'm gonna tell you now, for all listening, especially that knows me on the east side of Columbus, Ohio, I was a little cut up. I was in Saturday school. I was in school suspension. I was suspended out of school. I gave my poor mother a run for her money. However, I had a great childhood, and I had a great community that poured into me. And of course, all of that is the reason and everyone I credit for my later success. That being said, we want to give you a blueprint as a parent to help your child be successful as well. So one of the biggest things that I want to talk about, especially if you know my story, I'm a former educator as well. So I worked as a teacher in public school. I've worked at pretty much every level. I've worked as an elementary school teacher, middle school teacher, as well as, I'm not sure if I worked as a middle school teacher. I worked as a middle school administrator, a middle school assistant principal, but I was an elementary school teacher, and I was also a high school assistant principal and a middle school assistant principal as well. Okay, and so working at all of those levels, I had an understanding of what it's like to be in the schools, what it's like to engage with children and young people and young adults, what their day looks like, what happens during those classroom transitions from bell to bell, what happens at recess, what happens at lunch, what happens at breakfast, what happens at the buses, what happens on the buses, what happens at the bus stops, what happens inside those classrooms as well. Okay, so I've seen it all. I've been there and I've done it all. I've also sat in on, of course, I've been the party signing the paperwork for those out of school suspensions, for those in school suspensions, and occasionally I've been one of the prosecuting administrators when it's time to expel a student from the school system, right? Or from the school district. And so before you get there with your child, we want to share a little bit of information. This is a PSA. Of course, the Shakhan and Wilkerson law firm doesn't profit in any way from sharing this information. It's important information, and that's why we want to impart it. All right. So that all being said, I want to talk about perhaps the most important thing that you should know as a parent is that, especially as your child ages and gets older, your influence over them will wane. The influence that, of course, begins to really take rise is going to be their peers, and that probably does not come as a big shocker to you, especially because we've all been kids before. If you're a parent that's watching this video, and we know how important our friend group was to us and how important respect was from that group of peers that we had, and oftentimes how influential that group was on our lives and on the lifestyles that we chose to partake, right? And so understanding that is going to be essential, because you want to make sure you encourage really who your children befriend where you can. It's going to be challenging for you if you're not obviously in the schools with them, but you want to inquire, and maybe you want to even get the school administrators and those teachers involved. That's where it's important to really be involved in their education, because you can inquire from the teachers, hey, who is my child hanging out with? Or you can go, and if the school allows it, to have lunch with your child. We allowed, when I was in the school system, for parents to come into the school and occasionally monitor and check in on their child, right? So they may not, the child might not be aware that the parent is doing a drop-in, right? And they can watch their kid from outside in the hallway interact with other students, right? And so you can kind of get an understanding of what their peer group looks like. More and more, of course, that peer group, a lot of that communication is going to happen over some of the electronics that are available to young people. So that's going to include, things like telephones, a lot of the electronic gaming systems, where there's a lot of, exchanges of communiques. And so you want to monitor that stuff. Social media is huge. And so letting your kids have access to that at an early age is going to be problematic. And so I would always encourage, I don't believe, young people need to have those smartphones, early on. Of course, as kids begin to age out, it becomes, it feels like it's important to their existence. But the more access they have to the smartphones, the more access they have to things like social media. And we already know the data is coming back that a lot of the, access to social media and that online adult community is going to be harmful to the development of young people. So be mindful of that. Be mindful of that peer group, because one poor choice regarding the peer group is going to impress, essentially some really, one person in that peer group that is a bad decision maker might actually impact the entire peer group. And so what you don't want is one of your child's peers to become one of his or her co-defendants. And that is what I see. I've worked in juvenile court, as will continue to work in juvenile court as a juvenile court defense attorney, but I've done on the delinquent side. And so a lot of times we see, usually there is one child or multiple children that are making these decisions that are essentially impacting an entire group of young people that are putting them, like I said, in really, really bad position where they are coming in contact with the justice system. Okay. And that is not what you want as a parent. So monitor those peer groups, really important. Number two, explain the consequences of fighting. Fighting is one of the best ways nowadays to find yourself an intake at juvenile court. It used to be once upon a time that the schools kind of handled that internally. And so when I was in the school systems, we began to see the unrolling of really more cooperation between local law enforcement and the local school districts. You began to see that there were school resource officers that were embedded in the school system, right? That came along with a lot of the electronic equipment to monitor, to make sure that, guns weren't entering the schools in specific areas in specific school districts. However, all it takes nowadays, of course, is for your child to be involved in an altercation, a physical altercation that might get them a citation with the school resource officer. Okay. And so, now you're not just looking at a potential suspension, you're looking at, maybe a citation and maybe a car ride to your local justice center. Okay. Whoever is going to process juveniles in your community. And when that happens, of course, you get contact with the Justice Department. Then you are looking at that school to prison pipeline. And oftentimes, after that first point of contact, you're looking at more contact later on. So we want to make certain that contact is minimized. That being said, talk to your children about fighting in school and the consequences of fighting. So, so it's not just about those school suspensions. Some districts are, they have zero tolerance for violence. So some will suspend, some school districts will expel you. Some will initiate, again, the school resource officer. The child might be arrested, detained, take the ride down the juvenile intake, be booked into the justice center, and then they might initiate some kind of criminal proceedings against your child. All right, there might be assault or battery charges. I've seen it all. Right, things that to me looked like a school fight. Pretty cut and dry altercation, disagreement, maybe two parties in the bathroom. Now the minor child has charges and is at the juvenile court, and guess what? I'm his defense attorney. All right, he's been charged with battery, right? Charged with assault. Okay, charged with making terroristic threats. Okay, so we want to avoid all of that for your child. Okay, and so the best way to keep your child out of the juvenile justice system is to make sure that they're aware of all of this stuff, and aware of how aggressive some of these schools are, and school administrators and school resource officers are in terms of quelling violence in the schools. Okay, so some of them are some schools districts and some schools are very sensitive to this type of violence. Okay, or to any violence whatsoever. All right, in the school. So just you got to be important. Got to be mindful and share that information with your kid. You don't want your child to have a juvenile record. And you don't want your child, especially if they're involved in athletics or any kind of academic clubs, to be ineligible for those clubs because of something, a small mistake that they made in their ninth grade year, getting in a fight in the cafeteria. Okay, so keep that in mind as well. All right, remind them that that basically social media is very public. So another thing that we see sometimes at the juvenile courts is there are these exchanges that are happening over social media. You're getting into the realm of cyberbullying, again, harassment. A big one is terroristic threats. And then, of course, another one is going to be, I'll talk a little bit about it shortly, is the nudity and sending nude pictures of minors over, again, social media. Okay. Sometimes it happens over the phone. And so you don't want it to be your child to get involved in these what are perceived as sex crimes, because that absolutely you don't want to see that on a child's record, and that might come with its own consequences. Okay, but a lot of this stuff again that used to be handled internally by the schools, and you got to understand that many of the schools are overwhelmed. Okay, and some of them are fighting for their academic lives, and they just don't have the resources to handle a lot of the social issues that some of the young people are coming to the school with. Again, the teacher's primary job is to educate the minor children, and so they're focused on, they have an academic mission, and so it becomes a challenge if there are young people there that are there for other purposes or that are easy to get off track. Okay, and so you're seeing again the emergence of this of law enforcement in the schools, and they are, for all intents and purposes, in many instances, they are taking over the discipline part of what happens when kids get again essentially sidetracked. So you want to make sure that you address that with your children, the social media component. And again, that comes back to the peers. I'm gonna hound you guys on these peers. You have to watch your child's friends. You absolutely have to stay on top of your child's friends and your buddies. They are the ones that are exposing them to, like I mentioned, alternative lifestyles, things that are unacceptable in your home. Their peer group may be overexposing them to. Okay, and so you have to stay on top of your child's buddies and your child's friends. Okay, because we know how your child leaves your home. We know how you expect them to represent you out in public, and we understand all that you have poured into them as a parent. But it is hard, especially as a legal professional now, to see parents show up in court and really be mystified at the conduct of their child in the school, right? Because that's not the way they were raised at home. And so you have to stay on top of your child and that peer group. You have to monitor their electronics, and I mean monitor their social media. You have to stay on top of them to keep them beyond the reach of the juvenile justice system. That is their only hope, right? You are their last and final line of defense. Okay, you can't expect the school system to do that, and I'm gonna let you know, with waning social services, with waning parks and recreations, with waning employment opportunities for teenagers, it becomes a lot more challenging to do your job. And I understand that, all right? But just letting you know, again, back to that ounce of prevention, is worth a pound of cure. Once, they get into that juvenile justice system, they are essentially in that school to prison pipeline. And we know what comes out of the other end of that pipeline. Understand that, because I represent a lot of clients in the adult system that started having problems in the juvenile justice system. It's where it starts, okay? So we want to address it early, but you can also, there's a different kind of a pipeline, and we want our children in that pipeline to success, all right? That pipeline, as we already mentioned, to these great careers, whether that's going to be the military, whether it's going to be college, whether it's entrepreneurship, which they should absolutely 1000% be considering as an entrepreneur myself. So these are the pathways that we want our children on. We do not want them on the school to prison pipeline. That is a one-way trip and one-way ticket to essentially the adult justice system. That's not what we want. All right. So never post threats of bullying online. Never share videos of fights. Think about posting anything that can be misunderstood. You need to have those conversations, with your child regarding social media. The things that they post, the things that they comment on, the things that they share, the things that they are sending direct messages on, the nudity, if they're videos of underage minors, and they are disseminating that stuff. They are asking to essentially not just be dragged into the principal's office, but they are asking to be dragged before a juvenile court judge, and they will answer for it. Okay, I am letting you know this, and you need to have the conversation with your child, or y'all need to sit down and watch this video together. Okay, and I'm letting you know this as a former school administrator. I'm letting you know this as a defense attorney in the juvenile justice system, as well as the adult system. This is how you get your child dragged before the juvenile court. And then you and I are sitting eye to eye having a conversation about, how I'm trying to keep your child from being detained. Okay? Okay? Fair enough? All right. So let's talk a little bit about weapons. Okay? If you have weapons in your home, you need to lock them up. Okay? If your children can get access to them, I hate to say it, but they may exercise that freedom. Okay, so if you have weapons, even look-alike weapons, things like BB guns, your children, a lot of these schools, again, they have zero tolerance regarding weapons. There's a recent case in Houston County. A young person brought a weapon to school and essentially discharged that weapon in school. I believe he's 14 years old. I don't know the facts of the case. I don't know all the details of the case. I believe they have him in Superior Court. I believe he's going to be charged as an adult. Okay, 14 years old. This is what the school to prison pipeline looks like. Okay, and so his part of his life has been determined. Okay. And, I don't know, his guilt, or I don't know his innocence. And of course, I'd be more than happy to look into the details of the case. If that's something that, our viewership is interested in hearing an analysis, of course, when more of the facts come out. However, if the facts are true, okay, it's a bad deal for that young person and whoever the victim was, right? And that community, right? Because you have a community of young people who were essentially perhaps in the vicinity of a community of educators who are probably traumatized by that experience. Imagine sending your child to school with their lunch pail. If folks still pack lunch, my mother used to pack me a lunch in elementary school. And you hear this heartbreaking story, and it shakes your trust to its very core and foundation about whether or not your child is safe in this environment, which is not supposed to have guns and people who are, involved in these serious altercations is not supposed to have that in that type of a setting. So, you have to be mindful if you have firearms, um, and you have children, minor children, you need to lock them up. Okay. Or if you have weapons, you need to lock them up. You need to be a good steward of those weapons. Otherwise, your child gets access to them. You have situations. Okay. And so that's really important. And make sure that talk to your child about weapons, bringing weapons to school, even those look-alike weapons. Okay. And I've seen things involving, pepper spray, mace, knives that are, I think it's over 3 inches. Those, school is not the place for that stuff. So, because of, the way young people are wired, they get angry. If you have a firearm on you, you might use it, right? If you use it, then, obviously, it's going to be hard to really explain why you brought the firearm to school, why you brought that weapon to school. Okay. And so think about that, have that conversation with your child. Discuss drugs, alcohol, as well as vaping. Vaping is huge. We do see a lot of young people that are engaging in that type of conduct, which is harmful, to their health for all the reasons that the data has come back, discussing popcorn lung and just the developmental challenges, health challenges that might come with long-term use. Same, of course, with cigarettes and alcohol, but bringing those things to school, drinking those things and ingesting those things, and of course, with the a lot of the drugs and the gummies and the THC and all that stuff, all that stuff you definitely need to monitor. Especially with the emergence of fentanyl, which is it seems like a lot of these drugs, these recreational drugs, are laced with. Kids are really suffering, kind of mental health conditions because they are ingesting some of this stuff, and of course, it's absolutely going to impact their conduct. And so, you do want to make sure that you're monitoring your kids, going through their things. I know that a child's room is supposed to be sacred. I can't tell you how to raise your children. I can recall when I was a young person, feeling that my room was sacred, until my stepfather, who it was his house, he took my bedroom door off its hinges, right? And so there with my privacy, right? But it was his house; it was not mine. And so it made me. I was very clear on what my conduct needed to look like behind those closed doors or lack thereof, right? But you should, if you have to go through your children's things, in order to make sure that those drawers under the bed, all the secret hiding spots, used to be young men, hid girly magazines under some of these secret in their shoe boxes and their tennis shoes. Now we're seeing firearms. Now we're seeing pills, right? We're seeing things like marijuana, all right, and so and other drugs, and whether they're used for recreational purposes, or engaging in criminal enterprise. So you want to go through your child's things, and look, we're just having an honest conversation right now. I'm having an honest conversation with you. I'm not trying not to talk to you as a school administrator. I'm really talking to you as a legal professional, all right? Because these are the conversations that I have to have with my clients, okay? And so it is a no holds bar conversation, if you can imagine. We have to be real, right? And so because of the nature of a lot of times the crimes and the charges, and no one is going to pull punches. Certainly not the prosecutor. I can guarantee you that. Okay, the prosecutor is a hammer your child is the nail. All right. And so we try to come in between the hammer and the nail, if you will. To us, your child is not a nail. We try to humanize it. That's the nature of their job. I don't think prosecutors are bad people. The job is actually very hard. It's very difficult, and it is taxing. I will say that. However, it is our job, and their job is to protect the community. All right, from folks who are committing all types of crimes, and so our job is to humanize the folks who are being touched by the criminal justice system. Okay, and so that is the way the system is built. All right, and so it has checks and balances as all of government here in the United States. That all being said, I don't mean to lecture, but I'm trying to be real as possible with you, and let you know. I would prefer, you and your child have a really courageous conversation about all of these things than for the three of us to be sitting in my office, or worst case scenario, your child is behind bars, and I am going to go visit with your child, and having this real talk with them about what our strategies are going to look like in building a defense for them. Okay, all right. So have a real conversation with them. Drugs, alcohol, vaping, that type of stuff. A lot of times the crimes that I see young people that are involved in, that have been charged, drugs and alcohol are usually involved. Okay, and so the more familiarity with it they have with it, the more it's normalized in their peer group. Again, you're setting yourself up for bad decision making. Okay, and so when young people are imbibing, when young people are drinking alcohol, taking drugs, popping pills, smoking marijuana. Adults make bad decisions doing those things. So imagine a human being with a half developed brain, the decision making that they are making regarding driving a vehicle that weighs a couple tons down the interstate, or hanging out with their buddies after 2 a.m. playing Call of Duty, having access to firearms. If these are juveniles, a lot of times bad decision making is part of a rite of passage when it comes to being a juvenile. I know, we were juveniles. We've made bad decisions, but we don't want to make bad decisions that are going to impact their future, your child's life, or anyone else's life in their community. The text messages is another thing you want to watch and you want to monitor. Threats, harassing messages, explicit photos. I talked to you about those photos. For whatever reason, I guess young people like sending nudes. Okay. The problem with it is, okay, you are talking about minors. Okay. And so you're running into a problem when you are sending nude pictures of other minors. Okay. And so you want to just be mindful of that. Please tell your child about that before they end up in juvenile court. I've handled those cases. Okay. And so you don't want those type of charges. All right. And so, don't engage, and you need to share this with the child. Don't engage in sharing their nudes or anyone else's nudes, with friends, or even if you're keeping it for your personal library. Okay. Just don't do it. All right. We take calls where students have engaged in this stuff. You're getting the district attorney's office involved in it. The school is no longer interested in the case. It becomes a case that's sitting on the assistant district attorney's desk. Just don't do it. Okay. Have a conversation with your child about it And if need be, you need to monitor that phone. And there are ways, I don't know all the software that's out there for you to monitor those text messages and the communiques that come in and out of those smartphones. Okay, which is one of the reasons why you want to probably think about giving those smartphones away a little bit later in life. That is my 2 cents. I know parents feel how they feel about their children having access to their children, and their children having access to them or to a phone. A lot of school districts are making some changes, and I've seen it in headlines recently. I know you have as well. Some school districts, and I think there's some new law in Georgia, and I'm not too familiar with it, about having cell phones at school. Okay, so that's going to change, right? Because it has become very, very disruptive, and it makes it, a teacher's job is already challenging. I could make a series of videos on that. And school administrators' jobs are already challenging. You don't want to be monitoring a classroom for cell phones. You don't want to get into a tit for tat with the child about taking the cell phone. It's super disruptive. It completely destroys the academic environment. And it's unnecessary to have that device with you, of course, in a learning environment. That's my 2 cents. Okay, that's my 2 cents. All right, so make sure you're monitoring those devices, though. Okay, and that goes the same with those gaming systems, because they can. I think there's a lot of discussion about Roblox. There are adults on Roblox that are talking to minor children. You have to monitor that stuff, parents. Do not allow those the technology to raise your children. All right. I know that it's been a good surrogate. However, it is doing a very poor job with parenting. I can promise you that. So you are the best example that minor child can have of what it takes to be a functional human being. And so we need you to continue to be that shining example for your young person. Okay. All right. Stress respect for the teachers and the staff. All right. And so that respect comes from you. You need to get in there. All right. You need to let your presence be known with the school administrators, with the bus driver, with the teachers. They need to know you. They need to feel like they have access to you. They can email you. You come to parent-teacher conferences. You need to drop in. That way, that sets a tone for your child. All right. They let you know that let your child know that you mean business and that they're being monitored. Okay. And so a lot of times child will take the liberties that are made available to them. So you have to stay on top of it. I mean, it's just something. You have a child, you have to stay on top of your child, okay? Making sure that, they're held to a higher standard, right? And then attend, school consistently. I just mentioned that. It's best for you to do. It's going to help keep your child's academic performance up. It's going to, minimize truancy. They know that you're coming up there checking in on them. They're less likely to skip school, right? So, of course, there is going to be corresponding evidence between that shows that the more your child is in school, the better they perform academically, right? And so if they're not in school, it's not a mystery. They're not going to do well in school, okay? And I can vouch for school does not have the most interesting topics and subjects, so it's up to you as a parent to bring a lot of that curriculum to life for your child. It's challenging for all young people, particularly. There is science out there to suggest it's very challenging for boys to sit still, whether you're doing periods, blocks, or worse. Sitting still for almost 90 minutes and listening to any topic, right? Any subject without really being engaged is going to be challenging. So you need to find ways to make it, interesting for your person. That is a challenge. But I will say there are so many resources out there to parents, especially homeschooling parents, that you can find a way to bring education to life for your child. Okay. But make sure that you are available and avail yourself to the school teachers and administrators. And then lastly, you do have to stay involved. Okay, not lastly, but you want to stay involved and keep your child involved. In civics, keep them involved in athletics and academic programs, academic groups. Even things like extracurriculars, Glee Club, whatever their interest might be, Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, 4-H club. I don't know what's out there, but make sure that they are active. Make sure that they are vested in their community. Okay. That is the best way. And it's going to be the best way for you to influence their peer group, right? So you want to influence their peer group, put them on the basketball team, let them learn camaraderie, stick them into ROTC. Okay, let them learn some discipline. Put them on a football team. Let them learn some toughness. Help them, tell them to go wrestle. Join the wrestling team. Work on their endurance. Tennis, right? Or any kind of academic clubs, Spanish club, right? Whatever, okay? So the more involved they are, and then of course the academic community, the athletic community, the extracurricular community is going to impact their peer group, who they hang out with. All right. And so you want to surround your child with young people who are all moving in one direction towards success. Okay. That's what we're working on. All right. So teach them to think before they act. Super important. It's challenging for adults to do that. All right. I still battle with that, right? In my ripe old age. And so, teaching it to young people is important, right? To try to think and process things before they act. Let them know that, hey, man, if you do this, someone could get hurt. If you bring this weapon to school and you're caught with the weapon, listen, you're on the football team. Listen, we had a plan for you to go to college. This is going to derail that. Talk to them about consequences, okay? How it's going to impact their future, all right? Or how it might, impact others' perception of them, all right? So really important. And encourage open communication. You want your child to communicate with you, certainly. You don't want your child to be your best friend and your pal, because at the end of the day, you're their parent, they're the child, and they're just going to be some things. It's just going to have to be the way that it is, all right? Because I said so. But at the same time, you do want to encourage open communication. You want to know if they're being bullied. You want to know if they're feeling pressured by their friends, if they're struggling emotionally with things, if they're facing some type of disciplinary issues because of some decisions that they've made, or if they're worried about something at school. You want them to tell you that stuff, okay? And then teach them their future starts today. That's really important. Their future starts today, okay? And so let's make sure that our young people are set up for success. And so my final thoughts are going to be, watch this video. If you have to, sit down with your child, watch the video. If you know that, Ray Ray across town, Ray Ray's mom could probably use, or Ray Ray's dad could probably learn something from this video, go ahead and share it, or share it with the family member. But this video is a PSA. This is not help Shakhan and Wilkerson Law Firm. This is for you so that you do not have to call us to represent your child in a criminal defense matter. Of course, if you do need a lawyer for yourself or for your child, you are welcome to give us a call, 404-999-9529 or 478-845-1213. Or you can hit the link in our bio. But my hope and prayer for you and your family is that you do not have to make that call, because you have taken our advice, you've heeded our warnings, and your child is on a pathway to success. I believe it. I'm praying for it, for you and your family, and for your children, and for our community. And I believe that we can turn things around. I believe that prayer helps, but I believe that preparation, I believe God loves. My mother used to tell me, God blesses the child that essentially can hold their own. Okay. God bless the child, she said, that has their own. So that has significance and meaning to me. And I believe that we have as a community everything that we need to turn the ship around. All right. And for you, that starts with essentially, like I said, following the information, because they're not instructions, following the information that I shared with you today and sharing that information with your child, your young person. Okay. Thank you for joining us as always. And if this has been helpful, please like and share and consider following us. Okay. My name is Genghis Shakhan, and I'm with Shakhan and Wilkerson Law Firm.